The Sony RX100 Mark VI, a very powerful point-and-shoot camera that costs... Wait, it costs how much? What's up everyone, I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. I am a huge fan of powerful tech that comes in small packages. And darn it, if Sony isn't taking that literally with the brand new RX100 Mark VI. Sony's RX line in general is really one of the few instances of point-and-shoot cameras that have not gone the way of the VHS. Because, you know, for all intents and purposes, these are basically small A6500. They do most of the same functionality and a few extras of their bigger APS-C cousins, but before we get too far into the weeds on the Mark VI, let's cover the basic specs to get us all on the same page. Spoilers for those who haven't seen a video of mine before, I don't really take photos, so these specs are overwhelmingly going to be concerned with online video production. The Sony RX100 Mark VI is a super portable point-and-shoot camera from one of the top YouTube darling camera manufacturers, that's Sony. The main star of the camera itself is the 1-inch backside illuminated CMOS sensor buried inside of it, and it's installed with the new Bionz X processor that allows for some really cool things we'll talk about here in a minute. The really big selling point of the new Mark VI is the Zeiss 24 to 200mm equivalent zoom lens, giving this an effective 8.3 times optical zoom, which is pretty amazing considering the size of the camera. That zoom lens has a maximum aperture of f2.8 to f4.5. Another huge advantage of the newer RX100 series of cameras is they have Sony's excellent phase detection autofocus. It's so good. Whew. And so now we're out testing out, you know, the brand new Sony RX100 Mark VI. It's super exciting stuff. One of the problems that I'm finding right off the bat that I realized right as I got out here is we're having the same screen issue that I had on the Sony a7 III, where I wear polarized sunglasses all the time, and here, I'll show you. You can't see it with polarized glasses on, which is kind of a big bummer for those of us that wear sunglasses all the time. But I'm sure, just like the a7 III, if you just pop a screen protector on it, it'll be fixed. But something that I do like, and one of the reasons that I'm considering using this camera in the first place, is the impressive video qualities for the size of the package and the autofocus. You can see it's got a box around my face for the autofocus, which means that, you know, wherever I go, it should keep me in focus, which is, you know, as a run and gun style thing, is a really good feature to have. One of my problems with my GH5 is that even though I'll get the box and it'll check my eyeball, it won't keep it. A big problem with the RX100 that we'll talk about here in just a second, but you might notice that I'm recording audio off camera right now. I've got a Zoom H1N that's recording the audio for this clip because this doesn't have an audio in, and I really hate using onboard microphones for that. So if you're gonna use this for like big important things, gotta get an audio thing. I really like the Sony RX cameras for their small form factor, their high quality image. Okay, back to the video. And the last of the base specs that I really want to touch on are the recording modes. The RX100 Mark VI can record in up to 4K 30 frames per second. 5 minutes at a time, that is. And it has some insane slow motion capabilities. You know, my personal favorite being the 1080p at 240 frames per second. Seriously, even my GH5 that has crazy slow motion can't touch that. Okay, and this is a low light test of the brand new Sony RX100 Mark VI. You're seeing the exact same setup that you would normally be seeing on my a7 III. I mean, you can tell this is the exact same lighting setup. I did have to bump up the key light a little more because this is at f4, this is normally at f2. This has a gigantic sensor, this has a tiny sensor, but this is just kind of, you know, you can kind of see the difference on if you could use this in your own studio. We'll kind of see how the image looks afterwards, because I like small, portable, very high quality cameras. I don't like dragging this around everywhere, so if I can get a comparable image from a very tiny package, I am all for that. Now, this audio is not coming out of the camera itself, it's coming out of my Zoom H1 again, plugged into my boom microphone, so you do have to find workarounds to get decent audio out of it. I've been playing around with this camera for about a day now, so let's cover the initial things that I both really like and some things that I don't really like as much. First up, let's talk about the things that I don't like. A perennial weakness of the RX100 line in general is the audio. None of the RX cameras have an audio in. That would be such an amazing feature, and I'm pretty sure there's a little bit of brand protection going on here, because if this had the ability to take a mic in, why would you need one of the APS-C cameras? Well, I mean, besides the huge price difference, more on that later. The onboard mics aren't the worst, but I'm never a fan of using a camera's onboard microphones. So let's go ahead and do a quick audio test with the RX100 Mark VI. And you know, since people are gonna wanna use this as a vlogging camera, let's try it out, you know, just handheld a little bit. So this is me hand holding the RX100. Again, I can't see the screen. There we go. Now I can see the screen. This is me hand holding the RX100 Mark VI. It's super lightweight. I mean, that's the thing about these cameras, is they're just so lightweight. So it doesn't have the best stabilization. It doesn't have, you know, the stabilization of a GH5, but it doesn't necessarily need it as much because it's so light. You can just easily handhold it and walk around with it and just fit it anywhere. It's so awesome. But this is the audio coming off of the onboard microphones. If it sounds a little different than the audio earlier, this is not turned on right now because I want to full test. Okay, I think we've, hi GH5, hi Woods. Okay, let's head back. I don't know if that actually did. Oh, there we go. Now we can easily see ourselves. Vertical video. Nobody likes vertical video. And we're back. One of the ways you can fix that audio problem is using an external recorder like this Zoom H1N here, but you know, I just prefer I just like having a non-fiddly workflow. Just being able to record audio on camera is a pretty big deal for me. Another huge negative, in my opinion, about the Mark VI is we lost the built-in ND filter from the previous models. I can understand their reason for taking it out, which is another negative we'll talk about here in a second, but when filming outside, having a built-in ND, neutral density filter, is a huge benefit that is sorely missing from the Mark VI. Oh, what was that other negative that justified the no ND filter? Well, we mentioned it during the spec rehash, but that's the slower overall aperture compared to the older models. The RX100 Mark V has a maximum aperture of f1.8, allowing more light gathering capabilities and, you know, the ability to get a slightly, 1-inch sensor, shallower depth of field when filming wide open. I don't think the slower speed is a deal breaker, but it is frustrating and it kind of hampers the low light capabilities of this, nonetheless. I do have 2 negatives to go, but we're gonna do one here and then we're gonna do the last one in the conclusion. So next on the sad face list is overheating. Just like most other Sony cameras, form trunks functionality most times. Sony wants to make the smallest cameras possible, but they pack them so full of such good stuff that the heat management just is not able to keep up. My first time using the Mark VI was just a little bit of slow motion shooting with the sprinkle of 4K 30 in my backyard, and I got the overheating warning in just like 3 or 4 minutes. I think we all understand this, that if we're looking at a Sony camera, overheating is part of the equation, but it's really striking how fast this thing was put out of commission. Okay, enough of that negative stuff, because honestly, this is an amazing accomplishment of technology if you can work around its flaws. So what do I really like about this camera? Well, a lot actually. For the size, I love the quality of the image produced. I really do think of these point and shoots like mini versions of their APS-C line because they are just darn good. It has all of the manual functionality of a bigger camera, and it has all of Sony's log profiles, S-Log, and the new HLG Hyperlog Gamma profile that my A7 III shares. I like the functionality of the slow motion way better on the Mark VI as opposed to the Mark V. On the Mark VI, you can set the slow motion to start recording when you press the shutter halfway down, but it doesn't start the processing until you fully depress the shutter. That's so much better than on the Mark V, where you're just given like a short block of time for the slow motion. You can choose how long or how short it is. It's really great. And for the first time ever, you can record video with the shutter button. Mind blown! To my knowledge, this is the first Sony camera, at least the first one that I've used, that has that ability. You can usually only record video with the recording button, and I waste so much time trying to press the shutter button on all of my Sony cameras, like almost every other camera maker out there. Thanks, Panasonic. Come on, just give this to me on the A7 III. I also really like that the RX100 Mark VI has the touchscreen capability of something like my A7 III. And that's another first for this portable line of cameras. Like I've mentioned, I've only had this camera for a couple of days, so there is lots of recording left to do before I make any final determinations, but I do have a couple of impressions still to cover. Look, I'm really impressed by this camera. It's a fine piece of technology that for its size has some really striking features, but I'm not exactly sure who to recommend this to. Something I made a joke about in the beginning, but deliberately didn't mention until the end, is the price. The price on this camera at launch is $1,200. Yes, $1,200. For $1,200, you could have a full-on professional looking setup for YouTube, giving you amazing camera, lights, editing, computer, audio. I mean, you could fully be established for $1,200. Or if you just want a travel camera, you could get a Sony a6300 with the Sony 18-105 zoom lens for about the price of the RX100. You'd also gain audio in, a much bigger sensor, interchangeable lenses, and so much more. I mean, the a6300 does have a tendency to overheat. It does so way slower than the RX. Again, I'm not making any final determinations for another week or so, so I'm really hoping the portability shows me just who this is exactly for, because it is a fantastic camera, but that price, whew. Thanks for watching.